Sorry to pull you away from the concert. And I've got nothing to say, so bring it on.
So
what do you got?
What do you think about celebration to kick off what should be a great inauguration?
No, it's nice. I mean, I couldn't be more pleased. We were just talking, my wife and I were walking over here, how pleased we are that we did this as opposed to doing something without doing this. And forgive me for being eloquent, but the fact is to turn this into a charitable event for a fire that was the most devastating fire in California history for its victims, and to celebrate the first responders is just the right thing to do, and I'm glad we did that. And the fact that we are close to $5 million, and that's after all the expenses, that we're able to distribute to folks in need, and we'll figure out exactly who and how at a different time is something that I'm very gratified by, and I'm glad we were able to use the anchor that was the inaugural to be able to do that.
What's the theme of your first week going to be? What overarching message do you want people to take away from tomorrow and Thursday?
I'm not looking at it so situationally, meaning over the next couple of days. I mean, there's so much that logistically has to be done. And forgive me, just being personal, I mean, quite literally moving, and I mean into the office, figuring out where the light switches are, how to set up the computers, not just moving into a new home and getting kids into a new school, but a budget that within 48 hours I'll be presenting, maybe 72. The pending strike down in Los Angeles, the challenges we obviously face as it relates to issues related to our utilities, and so many of the other vexing issues the state faces. So all of that sort of puts a different perspective in terms of what I'm hoping to communicate and what realistically we can accomplish in terms of that communication over the course of the next few days. So this first week is really just getting my sea legs together.
So Mayor-elect, as you well know, climate change is one of the main causes of these fires. And the state's chief environmental policy to combat some of this is cap and trade. Do you feel like cap and trade is doing its job adequately now, and do you think it can into the future?
Yeah, I've been a supporter of cap and trade. I've said in the past, I mean, that I have an idealistic version of a carbon tax for the United States. In the absence of that, I think California did the right thing when it stepped up and advanced a cap and trade program. That said, there's some open-ended questions right now about the current status of the program that just require us to get under the hood and to make sure it thrives, not just survives over the course of the next few years. So it's like everything, it's iterative. You can't be ideological about it. As it relates to the cap and trade program, it has served us, I think, quite well. We're getting in the next phase of our low carbon green growth efforts. We've got to get into the issues of vehicles. We've got to get into the fuel side of things. I think the easy part, with all due respect, I think has been done. I think the next phase of our efforts to decarbonize our economy are going to be a little bit more challenging. You can't get much farther than 100% in terms of your goals. So we've stated a lot of goals. We've advanced a lot of ideals. We're going to have to implement them. And that's the challenge and the opportunity for our administration, and I would argue for the next administration that will come behind us. But I take a back seat to nobody. Anyone who's followed me, my political life, knows I was passionate about not just climate change, but environmental stewardship. San Francisco really led the nation from the paradigm of municipality a decade before. Frankly, a lot of the work was even being done up here in California. So it's a natural place for me to be. And we, of course, are taking over from someone who's been an extraordinary, not just national, but international leader in Governor Brown. So I'm very enthusiastic about taking those reins and taking that baton.
On the subject of fire relief, the last time I saw you was in Malibu with President Trump, where he said that he was developing a great relationship with you.
Yeah.
What was that whole day like, and how is that relationship going?
You want me to go into 7 hours on Marine One and Air Force One? Look, I will repeat what I said at the time because I really believe it. I'm really gratified that the president took the time to come out to meet with the first responders, meet with victims, meet with the mayor of Paradise, to spend the time down in Malibu. I thought that was important. It also was a chance to not only develop a relationship directly with the president, but his administration, the FEMA director, to his former chief of staff, to his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and many others that participated in that trip. I think those relationships matter. And as I said at the time, and I'll repeat it right now, there's no place for politics when it comes to emergency response. And I just want to maintain that status. The President and I may disagree on a lot of issues. I will, in fact, have some pointed comments candidly tomorrow. Nothing, out of the ordinary, things that are consistent with points of disagreement. But I'm not picking necessarily fights, but I am expressing myself and I think the sentiments of a lot of Californians on other issues. But as it relates to emergency declarations, as it relates to the fact that this president, from the Oroville Dam to all of these fires, from the ones down in Ventura, Santa Rosa, obviously Malibu, the Woolsey Fire, and Paradise, he's not played any politics, and we're very grateful for that.
So you're satisfied with the federal response
so far? Yeah, and look, we're in a different period now with Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a different time with the government shutdown. My eyes are wide open, I'm not naive or idealistic about these relationships. We have fundamental differences of opinion on the border wall, on issues obviously related to rhetoric around our diversity and our diverse communities, and issues related to healthcare and the environment itself, and et cetera. And so those will be expressed and I'm sure responded to appropriately.
And speaking of tomorrow, we're all going to tune in, but can you give us any sort of preview of what we can expect tomorrow?
Well, it's as you guys know, inaugurals, you tend to be idealistic, a little more soaring rhetoric. I don't know if it's soaring rhetoric, that's for more objective minds. And state of the state will sort of fill in the blanks. So let me preview the punditry. People say, well, he was short on specifics. Well, of course, I have an inaugural, but I'll be very detailed in the budget a few days later, and then we will architect in much more nuance and detail the state of the state. So I really see this as three opportunities, going to your original question, to communicate over the course of the next few weeks our agenda, our vision for this state, to basically take what we said during the campaign and begin to organize it in a more pragmatic and practical way.
Governor-elect, one of the last things that Governor Brown did was, another series of partisan commutations. He's made clemency a part of his agenda in a way no governor has before. Have you thought at all about whether that's something that you're interested in?
Not only thought a lot, we've had a lot of conversations, the governor and I, around this topic substantively. In all of our exchanges over the course of the last few months, been two areas, low carbon, green growth, climate issues, and not on the issues of criminal justice reform. He's very passionate about that, as you know I am as well. I was out front on Prop 36 and obviously Prop 64, 47, supported his efforts on 57, and I've been someone that has been very encouraged by the work that's been done over the course of the last 5, 6, 7 years here in the Capitol, and I want to continue that momentum. In fact, I'll speak to that tomorrow, an expression of the same. But as it relates to commutations, that's serious stuff. And I think it was reflected as well, the seriousness of this in some of the decisions the Supreme Court themselves made, which frankly surprised a lot of people. And I imagine that sets a tone for the next administration, our administration, to sort of work through why they had fundamental differences of opinion with Governor Brown, and try to augment our approach in a way that would assuage those concerns as we move forward. We are partners in this effort. Governor has certain capacity to do things, but those efforts are obviously something that the Supreme Court takes seriously and has the opportunity to review as well.
Did those rejections change your thinking at all about this issue?
Not in broad strokes. I mean, the governor's done something unprecedented, as you note, and he's been willing to take the political heat doing it, and I admire that. It takes a lot of courage, and so he's raised the bar, and I hope I can take the lessons in that example moving forward. But as I say, but let me say, it's difficult because each and every case is unique and distinctive. So I can sort of paint in broad strokes, but that doesn't mean much until I get those recommendations and I go through each and every one of those cases individually. And I can assure you the weight of that is pretty heavy. The governor looks at dozens of those every single week. There's a binder, quite literally. Every time I see him, he shows me the binder, and he says, this is one of the most important jobs you will have. And it's not one that often is brought to light unless the Supreme Court or unless something tragic happens with a decision. And it's an important part of my job and responsibility, and I'll take it seriously.
What's this like for your family? Not only moving, but also starting a new school and having all this attention on you, having attention on these kids.
That's the hard.
Like?
That's in the Railroad Museum today. That must have been overwhelming for your kids.
Yeah, I was shocked how well they handled themselves, but I can't promise that tomorrow. Look, they're young. The youngest is 2. The oldest just turned 9, and so every day is an adventure. Anyone who has children understand that. But this is, I think, they went through the break, and we just moved out of the house. They went up skiing, and I don't think they fully came to grips with the fact they're not going back to their bedroom, and they're not going back to their school. And so I appreciate the question. Forgive me for a personal response. It may not be interesting to folks, but that's something we talk about the next few weeks. That's going to weigh heavy on my wife and I, and trying to figure that out, and as you suggest, deal with that transition and the kind of scrutiny that may come from that.
Great. With this concert being about, benefiting the wildfire victims with these historic blazes the past few years, do you think that the public utility model, in terms of, just in terms of like local government control, greater accountability, like that would benefit the customers of IOUs, for instance? Yeah,
look, I don't want to get into the details of what we're currently doing, which is processing all this. Look, I was out front as former mayor on community choice aggregation. So when it comes to the issue of localism and competition choice as it relates to IOUs, I an interesting history and record there, not only as a former mayor, but a former supervisor. And going through process of trying to figure that out. You can be idealistic about it, but there's a pragmatism of application, implementation, which is not easy. But one thing is pretty self-evident, that we're at a point of procurement as it relates to the issue of electricity, where the whole traditional model is now being challenged by the fact that you're getting power purchasing agreements from companies directly. You've got CCAs that have come in, and yet we have an old structure, an industrial structure to govern it. So I'm thinking about this more broadly, not just, again, the issues of PG&E and the immediacy and challenges we face with that utility, but more broadly, how we govern in this environment. There's a second point, or forgive me, a final point. There's a broader issue that ran a course, went about 90% there on the issues of regionalization. What's going on at ISO, Cal ISO, et cetera. And we really have to we have to look at that in the context of those 2045 goals, and more broadly, the efforts to ultimately fulfill the promises we've made on decarbonizing our economy.
Governor, do you think it's time for the Capitol to address the question of where people are living in terms of these urban wildland interfaces in these increasingly dangerous areas?
It's tough. I mean, the answer is yes. But what does that mean? As a former mayor, and I understand localism, Governor Brown would say more broadly from a governance perspective, subsidiary, and the issues related to local autonomy, particularly as it relates to land use and planning. And if the state is going to supersede, that's a profound and pronounced change in policy. But helping shape that conversation and that debate, I think fundamentally is critical. The issues of Paradise are interesting to me. The first post office there wasn't in the last 20 or 30 years. It's close to 100 plus years ago. And so that interface is very different than a lot of the new construction that we've seen over the course of the last few decades in other parts of California. I have a personal residence. My father left to us in Placer County that fits that definition. And so I appreciate the struggles for folks up there, just clearing away brush, the costs associated with all the trees that are dead, all the challenges and stresses people face that also have to complement any strategy. So we're not just coming in saying, here's what you can or can't do, but how we can support communities that already have been built and how we can support their efforts to make sure they're more resistant
All right.
to
One more
fires.
question on the climate front, just really quick. The keep it in the ground movement, so to speak, was unsuccessful in convincing Governor Brown to end fracking and new oil leases.
I showed up at my house the other day.
You talked
So-
about that before. You said you were considering it. Have you thought more about it?
Oh yeah, we're looking at everything we can do to move forward with our goals, and I'll just leave it at that. Nothing specific. And there's not even a ... there. There's nothing to call Nathan about after and say, what was he suggesting? Don't read into that. I'm just here to suggest that as someone who used to chair the State Lands Commission, that was responsible for shutting down 2 offshore oil platforms and also locking in proven oil reserves that will never be explored again, Platform Holly and others, and Rincon, that I have seen some pathway, modest as it may be, to begin to move in a new direction. I'm not naive about the challenges related to what's happening in Kern County and other parts of the state, and the magnitude of the existing oil production in the state and fracking in the state. But I think there is an ultimate pathway here, and California, I think, can do a little bit more, and I will explore that.
Well,
Thanks, everybody.
This is the
Yeah.
parents involved with this teacher strike. 600,000 kids. Parents are wondering, do I take my kids to school? Am I
No.
crossing the picket line? Am my kid's going to be safe at school?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a huge...
Yeah, no, as a former mayor, I understand these things well, and was very involved and engaged. And I think we all have a lot of work to do to try to do our best to address these concerns. I haven't even been sworn in yet.
Right.
So I haven't had the privilege and pleasure of even having the opportunity formally to engage, but I have engaged in the context of seeing what we can do to help mitigate this and potentially do what we can to delay it, or ultimately to deny the prospect that folks will be denied the ability to not only get educated, but get a warm meal. I mean, this is profound in terms of its scope and scale. The issues are real. The stresses that our teachers are facing are real. I'll speak to a bit of those tomorrow as well. Our teachers do need to be supported. At the same time, there are pension pressures in our school district. There are fixed costs on healthcare that are real. Even with the increase in per pupil spending, it's just simply not enough to reduce these class sizes. And we're going to have to do more. And there's no more important district in terms of its size than LA Unified. And so all of us, I think, have a role to play. And to the extent that I'm needed, we'll be there.
All right.
Thank
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so
Do you like
much.
the Lakers better or the Warriors?
We are sitting in the home of the Kings. There's only one team at this moment.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Well, I love Pitbull.
Favorite football song?
I know, Mr. Worldwide. Nobody can get me there, man. All right, see you guys.
Thank you.